Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good day today. I am going to show you what it's like to get ready with me in the morning, as well as how I feminize my face. I really struggled to make this video for a long time, and I'm making this at the last second before I no longer need other colors to blend my shadow in. It was so really vulnerable for me to share my face without any makeup on, so I hope you'll be considerate. And I hope you like it. Thanks for watching. Okay, so this is my makeup bag and all the products that I'd be using on any given day, as well as the two oranger pigments that I used to use to cover my shadow. For the first step, I'm just painting on my foundation, which is Farlight Sand 155, and that's from Tarte's Double Duty Beauty Face Tape Selection. I'm also using a Real Techniques Liquid and Cream Foundation brush. It honestly took me a long time to find my actual foundation color, and I tried like 3 other shades until a beauty advisor at Ulta helped me find this one. I know a lot of people like to use little droplets on their face and then use a beauty blender to make it all cohesive, but I like to use a brush because I think it's very visually pleasing and it's very fun. I do honestly look like a ghost right now, but that is only because I'm blending all the uneven red tones in my face together. Throughout the whole video, you'll see me speed up processes, but I seldom cut so that you can see everything that I'm doing. Right now I'm using Tarte's Shape Tape Contour Concealer, shade 208 Light. I'm using concealer to cover up a blemish, and the brush I'm using is from Real Techniques. Here's the color combo I use to cover up my shadow in order of application. Here's the first color that I use to mask my shadow. I know there isn't much left, but it's definitely visible in person versus on my iPhone. I'm using Tarte Shape Tape Corrector and the color is yellow. I wouldn't have thought to use this color, but the beauty advisor who helped me suggested that we test this on my tattoos because of the blue and cool tones. It did end up removing a lot of my tattoo, but not all of it. So in combination with yellow, we added the foundation color and a pink. I am covering my Adam's apple. I am honestly a little insecure about it, but it's okay. Here I'm adding my foundation shade, and I use very small droplets and blend it in the same way I blended in the yellow. The beauty advisor instructed that I use a small amount of yellow, a little more foundation, and a very faint amount of pink. I've noticed that you don't have to be too precise when you blend them together, so long as they all mush into an even tone. Now I'll be blending in pink, and the yellow foundation color and then pink together will completely mask my shadow. Prior to this method, I would blend in an IT Cosmetics color corrector with a Derma Blend orange. The two oranges together with my foundation shade would hide my shadow, but in direct sunlight or overcast days, that orange would really pop and make it look very obvious what I was covering, which made me feel really insecure. With the yellow, pink, and foundation color, it creates a very natural and smooth effect that is not really noticeable in any lighting situation. For this part, I'm adding a concealer, which is a lighter shade than my foundation, and that color is 208 Light. Placing the concealer on the backs of my eyes just helps me look a little less tired. I often use my fingers because it's really fast, and I think the effect looks really smooth with my foundation underneath. With the contouring process, I didn't speed much up, so you can see exactly what I'm doing with my brushes and how thinly I'm applying both the highlighter and the contour lines. I'm going for a button nose effect. I'm adding lines that flow with the natural curves of my nose, and I'm making my nose look a little smaller. I add these lines here to really push the roundness of my cheeks, and I'm going with the lines of my face. For this curved contour line, I am going with the bottom portion of my cheekbones instead of raising them higher. If you raise them too high, you'll get two cheekbone shadows, which will look a little unnatural. The rounder your line is, the more full your face will look as well. Here are the two brushes that I use to blend my contour in. I'm using a Real Technique soft sculpting brush for the larger one and a defining crease brush for the smaller one. I start with my nose because it's the most complex part of the contouring in my opinion, and the longer that you wait, the quicker the makeup will dry. You want your brush strokes to follow the natural formations of wherever you're blending. The thinner your blurred gradient is, the smaller that portion of your face will look. And the wider that gradient, the rounder that portion will look. The blending method for contouring was what intimidated me the most before I started and while I was practicing. I didn't have the best brush control, but I practiced every day, so over time, it just got easier and easier. Here I'm adding what was picked up on the brush from the sides of my nose to add a soft shadow beneath my eyebrows. I'm going with the natural flow and shape of my face. And the way I do my makeup is strongly influenced by the way I paint. This is where I'm beginning to make the form of my cheek seem rounder. You're working with creating the shape of a sphere-like form and are defining it through that shadow. And for this part of my nose, I'm not creating a wide gradient, but instead a smaller, more abrupt one. This will help my nose seem a little bit smaller. Here you can see I'm going with the curve of my nose and I'm defining a circular form with my brush strokes. Now I'm using the Sculpting brush to softly blend in the contour and gradients that were laid down with the initial Crease brush. This is such a visually pleasing process for me, and I'm pressing down softly so I don't remove too much foundation, which is beneath my contours. Again, I'm really thinking about form, which gives me better control while blending. This is the part of contouring that I think most people think of when they think of contouring, and I still get the nerves whenever I do this part because if you don't get a very smooth look, it doesn't feel too good, and it looks a little messy. But if you pull it off, it's very satisfying. It's not as difficult as it seems, and you don't really have to be perfect. With time, it gets easier and easier each day by day. Here you can already see how different my face looks. If you focus on how I'm blending with the flow of that line and then chiseling upwards at a diagonal, that's pretty much the method. You can change it based on what you're comfortable with and how you're using your brush, but that's what I do. Now I'm using the highlighter part of the wood stick, and the layout is an exclamation mark on your nose, a circle on your forehead, a few lines next to the temples of your face, and lines going down at the center of my contouring for my cheek areas. Now I'm using Revolution's Highlighter Reloaded Dare to Divulge highlighting powder in combination with a Real Technique's medium blending brush. I softly paint over the highlights that I had initially laid down with the wood stick and then blend them in. The smoother your highlights look, the more aesthetically pleasing, but I am frankly the most sloppiest with this part of my makeup. I think wherever the highlighter powder falls off is just really pretty. I don't care if it gets on other parts of my face, on my clothes, whatever. For this part, I'm adding some bonus highlights that really push the shadows next to my cheek. It makes my face look rounder and also really cute. You can then see me adding more highlights to the doughy part of my eyes which also makes me look really cute. Now I'm adding blush, and I'm using an e.l.f. blush brush. I usually dab about 5 to 7 times, and I chose this color based on what my fingers look like pinched together. So that way the color seems really natural, and my method for packing in the blush follows the natural form of my cheek, starting close to my temples and blending in with a scooping motion. And then I'm going towards my nose. I'll also swipe the bottom of my nose with what's left of the blending brush from each side of my cheek. I'm flicking off a little bit of the prior redder tones. Now I'm adding Milani Rose's powder blush, and that's number 11. I'm adding this merely for aesthetics, and I learned how to do this from Samantha Lutz. She recommended where you place them with where you'll see me placing them. I also use this orange to blend in the blush fully together so that there's not really glimmers of my foundation in the light. Next, I'll be setting everything in together with a translucent powder, and I'm using e.l.f.'s Complexion Brush. Also, the brand of the translucent powder is Wet n Wild's Photo Focus. I'm also using the brush to blend in the contouring underneath. This makes the gradient even more smoother, and I think it's very pleasing. I am simulating the effect that I use when painting, and when I paint, I'm usually sculpting with a flat brush and then smoothing out details and smudging them with a complexion brush. Often, when I'm done everything after setting, I will notice that my nose looks a little rough as far as the gradient goes. So here I'm using an eyeshadow C brush, which I call a flat brush. I'm adding a little bit of my foundation, and I am laying it over where the areas are contouring a little too far down. I'm cutting out a smaller shape of my nose, and then I'm beginning to blend it all together to look a little more smoother. This part can be pretty tricky and frustrating, and you'll see me use multiple brushes to try and get a smoother effect. For a very soft application through contouring, I'll dab the contour stick with my defining crease brush, and I'll blend on top of what's already there. And once it looks smooth enough, I'll make it smoother with my setting powder and complexion brush once more. I use an ash brown pomade from Anastasia, and I usually dip my brush about 11 times, and I'm going for a sharp tail with a soft gradient at the start of my brows. I often change the size and length of my eyebrows, but this is just the shape that I went with for today. Whenever I run out of pomade from applying the shape of my eyebrows, I use what's left on the brush to create a soft layout for the start of my eyebrows. I usually use that sparing small amount for also adding thin lines within the gradient. I often change the level of darkness depending on what I'm feeling like for the day, but for this video I went with darker so that the camera would pick it up a little better. This did delay my flow a little bit, and you'll see me revising them a few more times than I normally would. In this moment, I'm pressing my fingers against the brush to squish it so it's super flat. I do this to make more precise lines, and I place those lines in the gaps of my eyebrows at the start of them and against the layout to chisel it out a little more. You'll see me often raising my eyebrows so I can make sure the lines are consistent. I accidentally apply too much, and this happens every now and then. To correct it, I use my tweezers to cut out the pomade. I'll then add a concealer to mask it. And if I have to, I'll use a Q-tip and lightly dab it with water to kind of erase that part, and then repaint some concealer in. And I'll add the pomade again if I have to. Now I'm using an e.l.f. eyebrow brush in combination with my concealer to carve the brows out a little more. The color is 20B Light. My goal is to make the shape of my eyebrows really defined and noticeable, so that there's not a smudging gradient from the pomade into my foundation. This will slightly push the form of your face, but you don't really have to worry about it too much, and I just think it looks very aesthetically pleasing next to the darker contrast of the eyebrows. Since my brush isn't really new, it's still a little smudgy in certain spots, and so on the tail I went a little too far in, so I'll add a more precise line with the pomade on top of that. This is where I'm thinking sisters, not twins, and that your eyebrows don't have to be perfect. And also, people won't really notice the differences anyways. I'm using such a small amount of concealer, so I don't apply too much and then like accidentally blend into the eyebrow shape. You'll see me cycling between my eyebrow brush and fingers to blend everything in. I love this pencil. I use this to outline a more feminine lip shape. I've noticed that drag queens tend to go for larger lips, and that does seem to add a quality of feminization. Samantha Lux recommends that you create an outline that's just barely outside of your natural lip shape, which is what I'm doing in this video because I agree with her. I think that looks really good. Here I'm using the RT Fine Liner again, and I'm using this brush to paint over any smudges that's left over from the pencil. I use a very small amount of concealer here so I don't blend in too much by accident. Here's all the products I'm using for my lips, and they'll be in the description below. To fill in my lips, I use Makeup Forever's Professional Paris Lipstick. The shade I'm using is Rogue Artist 164. I apply a thin layer so the upcoming lip gloss won't crack or tear it. After the matte lipstick, I'll use a NARS Lover to Lover lip gloss. I use a full brush's worth for each lip, and then I'll smack my lips together and then add a final layer. I also use Lip Gloss's brush to blend in the line art of the pencil together. To complete my lips, I use MAC's Lip Glass, and the color is Nymphette 303. I love this stuff so much, but you have to be really careful with how you apply it. It took me a while to figure out how to use this brush because prior I would tear apart the lip gloss underneath as well as the matte lipstick underneath. You have to be very soft and careful, and I apply 2 layers for each lip and then press my lips together just once. Now I'll be working on my eyes, and to start I use ColourPop's Of Quartz eyeshadow palette. For this tutorial, I'm only going to be using Mind Games to heighten my doe eyes. Next, I'll be using a Profusion Cosmetics Nudes 10 Shades palette. I start with clay for a base color and cover both of my eyes so I don't have to clean my brush in between colors. I add a thick layer at the center of my eye and expand outwards with an e.l.f. eyeshadow brush and an e.l.f. blending eye brush. I adore this palette. I think it looks very fine arts with a soft glam. Then I build a gradient with the color Tarte, and I focus on the edges of my eyeshadow, filling this space in with a crescent-like motion. I add a small sliver of Indulge where the shadow of my eyes suction. At the very bottom of my gradient, I add Calvary, and that just enhances the shadow a little more. I pretty much always create fall off when I'm adding my eyeshadow, but that's okay because I'll cover it up with concealer later on. Within the highlights of my doe eyes, I'll add Flurry for a soft tonal beige to white transition. And then between the shadow that I created with contouring and the natural shadow cast from my brow, I add Exclusive for a subtle pop. And lastly, I add Icon and press on the center of my lids with my fingertip. Then I'll smoothen the gradient for my eyeshadow with an e.l.f. blending eye brush, and this technique is pretty reminiscent of watercolors in my opinion. I also use this brush to scoop away some color, and you can see me picking up the fall off from the bottom portion of my eyes. I think this is a very simple method and it's very visually pleasing. In this moment, I'm mixing Tarte and Indulge, and then I'll blend that into the edges of my eyeshadow. I accidentally took off a little too much with my smaller blending brush, so here you can see me packing those colors back in, and then reapplying the watercolor method to even everything out. To complete my eyes, I'm using Moon Dust from Urban Decay, and this one is called Solstice. This is my absolute favorite shimmery glittery eyeshadow. The colors in person are pink with a minty green sparkle. Often when I'm in a rush, I'll just wear this instead of a matte eyeshadow because I think it just looks very complete on its own. Here's the eyeliner I use every day, and I think it's amazing, but if you mess up, it's really hard to remove. Doing my eyeliner every day still does give me a very soft anxiety, but this is how I do mine. This is what works best for me. I think the most difficult part is the starting line and then keeping it consistent across your eye. But with time and practice every day, it gets pretty easy. Now I seldom mess up. I still do, and that's okay though. Here's me drying my eyeliner with a fan that I love. The other one. And here's me covering the fall off from my eyeshadow. I'm using a concealer mixed with my foundation. These are my favorite eyelashes. They're from Hermosa, and I used to really struggle putting on my eyelashes, but now I can do them super fast. Sometimes I place them at the start of my eyes, and others I place them farther back. I use a duo brush-on adhesive to place them on, and I love this glue. I love the little brush, and I love how it's scentless. Sometimes I use a fan to speed up the process so the glue will dry quicker, but today I just blew on them. When I place them on my eyes, I usually float them on the center, and then press down at a corner, closest at the start of my eye, then following the end of it. I'll lastly press the eyelash against my lid by pushing the individual clumps of the eyelashes together, and then pressing it back, or I'll use some tweezers to press them on from the back. They don't have to be perfect, and mine often aren't. I love this eyeshadow. There's very faint orange sparkles in it, and the texture is almost charcoal-like. I use a small liner to create a gradient starting with the suction point of my eyes, and I pack in the most dark there. I drag the brush through my lower lash line and stop about midpoint. If you haven't noticed yet, I love gradients. They're a little hard to pull off until you have more brush control. So now that I do, I love them. Now I'm using Big Mood Pitch Black Mascara. I build this up starting from the darkest part of my lash line, being super careful not to bump my cheek or eyelid. If I do, I just remove it with a slightly wet Q-tip. After one layer, I add a second and really focus on the darkest part of my eyes. I add a thick layer to the top portion of my eyelashes to blend those in with my falsies. If you want your falsies to blend in a little more, you can always draw on top of them with your eyeliner. But today I wasn't really worried about it. And there we have it. There's me checking my reflection in the mirror, being proud of myself. It always feels really good and really rewarding to complete your makeup for the day. The total time spent for today's makeup was 1 hour and 31 minutes. Thanks for spending your time with me. I hope you learned something or at least enjoyed my energy. Here's me feeling cute and showing off the effect with my makeup. It's really subtle, but when you compare this to how my face is without makeup, you'll really notice the difference. I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye!